Quantumscape reported recently, and this is still very much a startup. They're still operating in the laboratory, trying to make the transition to the factory floor and bring a commercial product into the world of batteries, specifically solid state batteries. Tyler Crow, are you ready to go through their earnings, talk about what they're saying, their cadence, their cash flows, their balance sheet, try to arrive at some conclusion about the state of the business today and where we think about it in terms of being an investable business?
One of my favorite quarterly updates. Let's go.
This is a fun one. I'm Jason Hall. He is Tyler Crow. This is Investing Unscripted Video Edition. Before we get into the details with Quantumscape, though, this video is sponsored by The Motley Fool. If you're looking for even more great stock ideas, Quantumscape's a fun company to follow. It might be the right stock for some investors, but if you're looking for even more, you really need to check out our special offer. Go to our link, fool.com/unscripted. Our good friends over at The Motley Fool, you go to that link, they're going to give you their 10 best stocks to buy right now, absolutely for free. Check that offer out. Again, it's fool.com/. Tyler, before we get into the details of QuantumScape's results, I do want to talk about the stock performance right now. Again, there's not really a lot of business performance driving this because they don't really have a business yet. They're trying to build a business and get it started up. It's been off to a tough start so far this year. Stock's down 23%. Of course, it spiked in January on some good news that they reported. But if we look at it from that high, it's down even more, right? It's down a brutal 42% from that little spike that we saw this year. Now, since earnings came out, though, earnings were out on the 26th, so the day before, stock's up about 5%. It's made a little bit of a run. There's some positive momentum. Tyler, let's take a look at the earnings results. Again, there's not really earnings, so we're taking a look at the updates the company's given us as they move closer and closer to commercialization. This is the first thing that we're going to talk about, Alpha 2. So Alpha 0, let's go back there. Those were the first prototypes that they sent to third parties, to the automotive companies that are their potential buyers of these products. They developed Alpha 1 along the way, sent a few Alpha 1s to a few customers, and now Alpha 2, they just started shipping it earlier this year. And they talk about that was one of their big goals, their big 4 goals for this year is to get those Alpha 2 test cells out to customers. What did we learn?
My overall takeaway from what I saw in this is everything what they're saying is making sense. They're showing progress with the products that they're making. They had mentioned some consistency on manufacturing of certain components of their batteries previously. I didn't see as much of that in their most recent letter. So hopefully we've seen a little bit of an improvement on that end. And the things that they are talking about are the things that have been we'll call them the anxiety related to electric vehicles in general. Oh man, am I going to have to sit there and charge my vehicle for 3 hours if I'm on a long drive? Or what if it's really cold out? What if it's really hot out? How is this thing going to perform? Yeah, am I going to have to throw this vehicle away after 80,000 miles because the battery doesn't work like my cell phone? Because I had my cell phone for 3 years and all of a sudden the battery starts to die. And these are all things that QuantumScape has been showing in their data, and certainly at least in the data they're showing to investors in these shareholder letters, that they are making progress on these things. Now, as you and I mentioned off screen, it's a shareholder letter. It's dressed up to look as good as possible. There's chances there are some it's not as good as published. Directionally, it looks like everything that they're doing seems to indicate that they're still on the right path and there hasn't been huge deviations.
Yeah, I think that's right. I want to focusing on those 3 things that I was hearing on the screen when you were talking there a little bit, but key things they talked about are, first of all, how quickly can you get a charge in the battery? And we've known like that was one of the main things that makes solid state so appealing is the ability to get more electrons into the battery much more quickly than with lithium ion technology. And also we're learning the ability to get those electrons out very quickly as well. Generally, you have to solve for one or the other, which is not great for the automotive industry, right? If you think about, they talked about in their presentation, talked about like for high performance applications. And you might think about like an electric Porsche is high performance. You know what else is high performance? Semis, dump trucks, right? Where they need to pull a large amount of current very quickly just to get those very heavy vehicles moving. And also, those are the kind of vehicles that you want to get as many electrons into the battery as quickly as you can as well. So it's not just things that address the daily driver needs that we have as consumers, but they can also move it upscale into medium and heavy duty vehicles. They're not really talking about that, right? And I would guess with the partnership with Volkswagen, we'd probably see a high performance Audi, Porsche kind of vehicle as one of the early markets when they're at low volume production for this product. But again, the key thing, getting the charge really quickly, addressing temperature concerns. You talked about that. They highlighted that as well. And they didn't talk about it quite so much in this presentation, but we saw in presentations last year, they talked about the longevity of the batteries in terms of the cycle life of these batteries being able to be cycled so many times that is just incredibly impressive. So we know those positive things. I want to talk about the roadmap a little bit because as much as we've seen them generally deliver, especially really probably the past year, they've been pretty good about meeting timelines. You did mention that based on this roadmap that they released in the quarterly release, if you go back to their IPO, early 2021, I can't remember exactly when it was, from now, it does seem like things are getting pushed a little farther out than they were initially saying when they were first going public.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, when the IPO came out and within the first 6 to 9 months of them going to market, and if people remember, this stock went to an absurd valuation at the time. I think it was at one point, it was a $60 billion company. In the first 6 to 9 months, what they were talking about was a roadmap where they would be commercially scaled and producing to automotive suppliers sometime in 2026. And based on this roadmap, what they're saying is in 2025, they're going to be putting out higher volume prototype production. We're not actually at commercial. Now, whether or not that is on them, on QuantumScape themselves, trying to slow down, maybe if we go a little slower, we're not going to burn cash as quickly, or maybe a couple tweaks here and there. Some things took longer to figure out than we expected, or it's maybe automotive customers being very cautious, wanting to make sure that whatever they put in their vehicle is going to work. Because, like I said, putting a slipshod battery into something is a recipe for disaster here. So, based on this roadmap compared to what they said several years ago, it looks like they're slightly behind schedule, or at least what they originally said. That's not necessarily a bad thing. All things considered, when this company went public, this has just barely come out of a Stanford lab. And so to consider the progress that they've made in the 2, 3, 4 years since it came out, it actually is pretty impressive. There was a part of me that said they'll be lucky if this thing is live in 2030 and if they have any money left for that to happen. But based on this roadmap, end of 2026, 2027 doesn't sound like the most unreasonable time for a commercial product to actually go to scale, and that might work.
Tyler, I largely agree with you, and I'm going to add some additional context to it. Yeah, we've certainly seen a little bit of a slowdown from that original idea. That's not atypical, though, if we're being honest, especially when you're talking about a novel technology like this. And more context, I think it's important to remember going from Tesla, the startup, to Tesla, the public company, to the very successful Model S, to the best-selling car in the world, the Model 3. Lithium-ion batteries were existing tested products when the Model 3 and the Model S came out. So thinking about bringing a product commercial as novel and new and as innovative as Tesla was with what they did, they were just their biggest innovation was shifting away from trying to build an automotive grade battery to taking a consumer grade battery cell and then building based on known failure rates of that kind of product, right? So they weren't solving the problems that QuantumScape is solving, and it just takes longer to do. To me, the most optimistic thing is the fact that they have consistently made progress, right? I think that's really notable to mention. I do want to focus on a couple things here, talk about what they've accomplished, what they haven't accomplished, put some context around it, and then I want to talk about their guidance. They've given some guidance in here we'll talk about as well. So again, those Alpha 2 samples are out there and customers have them. The Raptor equipment is in place. That was put in place at the end of last year. They're still working on getting the Raptor process to where they can move to here and they can start some low volume production. And again, moving from sample cells to actual QSE5 prototypes. So again, the QSE5, this is the battery that they're looking to sell, right, to commercialize. So to actually start prototyping that is pretty important. And then Cobra, and Tyler, you and I talked about this offline too. I hate Raptor and Cobra, but it is what it is. That's what they're calling it. So we'll call it that too. But the idea is that Cobra is the high scale, it's the larger, high volume commercial manufacturing process, right? So taking Raptor and the learnings there to get Cobra, that process, into higher volume production next year, but again, still prototypes. This is meaningful progress, right? So that's important. Let's take a look at their guidance for us and what they spent last quarter, $141 million. And They're going to continue to spend money. They think for their full guidance, CapEx, another 70 to $120 million. So they're going to lay out more money. They ended the first quarter with $1 billion in liquidity, and that's really where you need to focus right now. Think about this as like that biotech that's got phase 2 or phase 3 clinicals going. How much money do they have left to burn before they can actually bring that product commercial? That's where we are with Quantumscape. So sitting on about $1 billion. So that's a decent amount of liquidity that management says that gives them the ability to extend the runway into the second half of 2026. If we go back to the roadmap and they're saying 2025 higher volume prototype production, then that means ideally at some point in 2025, you have OEMs say, yes, we want to order X number and we want to accept delivery in 2026. That means it gives them a roadmap to get to that point where they have those firm orders in hand. And that puts them, Tyler, and this is the most important thing I want to wrap the video up on for me thinking about the business, is they're going to have to go to the capital markets at some point, whether it's secondary offerings, taking on debt, forming a joint venture where they're using their IP as capital and they're sharing it with a JV partner. And we know Volkswagen, they're doing that with Volkswagen already. But however they want to bring in more capital, you want to be in a position where you have some strength when you're doing that versus having your hat in your hand asking for money. And I think the way they're trying to set this up is that they want to be in a position where they have the liquidity and customer orders in hand before they move forward with deploying more capital than they have to expand their production. And that makes it compelling to me right now. Where do you stand looking at it, being the more conservative investor, thinking about this business? I know you're probably not there yet, but what are you going to need to see before you're ready to call Quantumscape a stock that you'd be ready to put money in?
Everything that we've said, I think, like I said, I think they're on track. The biggest concern I continue to have is that commercial scaling is challenging. That's going to be a whole different level of challenge that we've seen other battery companies try to execute and it hasn't worked. I know the company that has really struggled with this lately is Enovix. I know we've mentioned it before in a couple of videos as a potential alternative idea, but their production scale has been disastrous and part of the reason why they're fledgling as a company right now. So that production scale thing is like, again, if I'm being conservative here and I don't want to take a position early, I don't want to invest on a hope and a prayer. If I come in and I can see a business that is showing real progress on commercial scale production, then yeah, I can get on board with this. And I don't think I'm going to be too late to the party here. It's probably be like this for another year and a half. As long as it's making progress, I'm going to be continuing to watch it and not throw it in the waste bin as an idea. But until I see an actual viable business, then yeah, I'm happy waiting and watching and following the story. It's a fun story to follow.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that's probably the right thing for most investors to do because at this point, the reality is that hope it has to be a pretty big piece of the investing thesis based on what we don't know, right? We don't know what the problems are. We see some really great things, but we still don't have the clear evidence that this is something that they can mass produce reliably at a reasonable cost compared to lithium batteries, right? It should be cheaper in some ways because of the materials that they're using, but the complexity of the process, their ability to replicate it, we just don't know. So there's a lot there. So for investors who don't have the intestinal fortitude to deal with massive amounts of volatility and also the reality of risking dollars that could be evaporate, right? They absolutely, because the risk of this going to zero is still material, right? So I think that's really important to remember. I think Tyler's largely right, though. I think for most investors, the best thing to do is be a very, very interested observer. Maybe take a really small position if you need some skin in the game to make sure you continue to follow it. That's how I am. But yeah, right now I'm tempted to buy more. But for all the reasons that Tyler called out, I'm just going to sit on my hands and continue to watch. Maybe later this year they have more evidence and they announce some prototype production of QSE5. If they announce an order from an OEM, I'm going to start getting really interested. But for now, I think the best thing to do is just sit back and watch. The story is getting really exciting and really interesting. But I do think we need a little bit more before anybody should be pulling the trigger.